Being a good citizen. Today I'm going to talk about citizenship and what it means to be a good citizen. One of the first things that often comes to mind when we're talking about citizenship is voting. So I'd like to start with a question. How many of you voted in the last election? All right. Very good. Now, how many of you assumed I was talking about the presidential election last November? Well, did you know that since then, 9 New Mexico school districts, including ones in Albuquerque, Rio Rancho, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces, held school board elections in February? Oh, I see some heads nodding. Excellent. Very nice. And that on that same ballot, Bernalillo County also held an election for 5 positions on the Central New Mexico Community College Governing Board. So, I'm going to ask again, how many of you voted in the last election? Hey, good job. Good job. Now, my intention in pointing out the February election is not to shame anyone, but I do want to draw attention to a couple of things regarding voting and citizenship. First, yes, voting is an important civic activity. And that means voting for more than just the president every 4 years. Elections happen every year, and everyone should do a little digging to find out what opportunities we have to vote on issues affecting our community. And keep in mind, when it comes to the smaller elections, it takes far fewer votes to swing an election one way or the other. So your vote matters that much more in the local decisions. The second thing I'd like to point out is that while voting is one of the first duties of citizenship that often comes to mind, accessing the right to vote is not as easy for some people as it is for others. Another poll the congregation question. Last time you voted, how long did the process take? So again, by a show of hands, how many of you were in and out of your voting site in 15 minutes or less? How many of you took between 15 minutes and 30 minutes? Okay. How many took somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour? How many took longer than an hour to vote? Well, I'm glad that there are an abundance of voting locations, as well as options like early voting and submitting an absentee ballot that make it pretty easy to cast your vote here in Albuquerque. But this is not the case in many places across the country. Last year, for example, Arizona's Maricopa County reduced the number of polling locations down to 60 when there had been 200 in the previous election cycle. This caused incredible overcrowding, especially in some heavily Hispanic neighborhoods. And even though the polls closed at 8 p.m., the final ballot was not cast until well after midnight. All of a sudden, waiting for an hour doesn't seem so bad, does it? But the reality is, even an hour-long wait is more time than some folks can afford to take to participate in this most basic right of citizenship. And it's far less likely for lower-income individuals and families to be able to take the time required to vote than it is for those who enjoy greater economic stability. If you have easy access to the internet, you can look up wait times at polling locations across the city. And if you have a car, you can easily get to the location with the shortest line. But if you don't have a smartphone, or if you rely on public transportation, you don't have the luxury to choose your polling location. Which means if you want to vote, you do it at the closest location to your work or to home, and you endure whatever lines or wait times are there waiting for you. So just for fun, I looked up how many polling locations there are going to be in Albuquerque for the upcoming election on October 3rd, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Of the 52 voting sites listed on the City of Albuquerque's website, 5 of them have a southeast quadrant address. Now, it is fair to say that the quadrants are not evenly divided either by geography or by population. And the southeast quadrant is the smallest in both population and in area of the 4 quadrants of Albuquerque. However, the southwest quadrant is much larger, and it also only has 5 voting sites. Now, in contrast, the northwest part of the city has 17, and the northeast has 25. Now, admittedly, I didn't try to reach anybody from the city for comment, but these numbers do make me wonder how voting locations are determined. And a look at the history of voter suppression in this country provides plenty of reasons for me to be suspicious. Of course, some might argue that we've come a long way from the blatant racism and very real violence that prevented people of color from voting in the 1920s. Consider this small excerpt from The Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. In the 1920s, Jim Crow Mississippi was, in all facets of society, a kleptocracy. The majority of the people in the state were perpetually robbed of the vote, a hijacking engineered through the trickery of the poll tax and the muscle of the lynch mob. Between 1882 and 1968, more black people were lynched in Mississippi than in any other state. And he quotes, "You and I know what's the best way to keep the N-word from voting," blustered Theodore Bilbo, a Mississippi senator and a proud Klansman. "You do it the night before the election." And in addition to direct threats of death and violence, state-sanctioned methods such as literacy tests and poll taxes were used to suppress the vote of minority and low-income voters until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Well, this didn't stop the systemic racism from pulling itself up by its bootstraps. And try again. Now, literacy tests and poll taxes have been replaced by voter ID laws and voter challenges, which is a process that allows people and organizations to call into question the eligibility of registered voters. I'll bet you can't guess who disproportionately gets challenged using this process. Done en masse, whole voting districts that are predominantly comprised of people of color can be called into question. Using a sports analogy, this would be equivalent of calling for an instant replay on every call a referee made. And of course, pure intimidation is still used to dissuade voters. In last year's presidential election campaign, Donald Trump encouraged his supporters to sign up to be observers and poll watchers by using the voter challenging system to call into question the credentials of registered voters, both creating barriers to the voter's ability to cast a vote and effectively slowing down the voting process in certain polling locations. Well, here's a thought. If we as a country require young men to register for selective service when they turn 18, and by the way, I'll note that this applies to U.S. citizens and to male immigrants, why not do the same for everyone when it comes to voter registration? It seems to me that if we can require someone to register to serve this country, we can also create a process that views citizen engagement in the democratic process as a right and not a privilege. So, in fact, the number of registered voters who choose not to vote, along with those who are eligible but don't even register, indicates to me that there is a significant portion of the population that views voting as a privilege, and maybe even a chore. Well, what if I said that voting, and even more broadly, citizenship, was more than a chore or a privilege? What if I said that citizenship is a human right, a birthright? Ernesto Cortez, a community organizer in the tradition of Saul Alinsky's Industrial Areas Foundation, likes to talk about the difference between a contract culture, which prizes individualism, and a birthright culture, which prizes and values relationships. Now, Cortez is taking the term birthright from the biblical story of Esau and Jacob in Genesis, in which Esau, the elder brother, sells his birthright to Jacob, the younger brother, for a bowl of soup. Now, in this context, birthright refers to all of the rights and privileges granted to the firstborn of a family. But in another context, birthright refers to the rights and privileges we all have by virtue of our being born. In this context, birthright means human right, and citizenship is a birthright. It is our right to exist in time and place, to call that place our home, and to care for it as if it is our own. So from this point forward, when I refer to citizens and citizenship, I'm not talking about whether you have a piece of paper from the U.S. government declaring that you were born here or that you waited a long time and passed a test. I'm referring to whether you live here and whether you choose to make this place your home and call this place your community. So for those who fall into this category of citizen, who live here, work here, and raise your families here, but are not allowed to vote, and for those who are fighting an uphill battle against a racist and classist system, all the way to the voting booth, I'd just like to remind everyone that voting is one way to practice being a good citizen, but it is not the only way. The only reason I knew to vote in the school board election last February is because I know people who that election was important to, and so it was important to me too. Being a good citizen means building relationships. Want to know an easy way to practice being a good citizen? Go get coffee with someone in your community. Have a one-on-one conversation with them. Find out what they're passionate about. Find out why they love what they love and what they would like to change about the community that you two both share. Citizenship is built on relationships, so get to know your fellow citizens. Citizenship is also about belonging. Who we belong with, but also where we belong physically. As embodied beings, we take up space. We must exist somewhere. We must belong somewhere. When we decide where that is and take an interest in a place, we are acting as citizens of that place. When we claim it and invest in it and build it up and establish our lives in it and raise our families in it, we are acting as citizens of that place. Want another easy way to be a good citizen? Take care of that place. This place. The place you call home, the place you are a citizen. Don't walk past that piece of trash. Pick it up. Pitch in and help with the setup or the cleanup of events that you attend. Volunteer your time and your energy. Donate to organizations who do good in your community. Be a good citizen by taking care of your chosen place and by caring for the people who share it with you and also choose to be citizens of that same place. Citizenship is about ownership, and not necessarily in the I have a deed saying this is mine sense, but in the taking ownership and the responsibility of a place, in claiming it and associating ourselves and our identities with it. I wasn't born here in Albuquerque, but my parents brought me here when I was 7 years old. I have only vague memories of the prior houses I lived in, one in San Antonio and before that in Beaumont, Texas. I tell anybody who asks that Albuquerque is my hometown. I was raised here. I went to school here. I grew up here. I learned to ride a bike, to play basketball, and to swing dance here. I drove my first car here, and I got my first job here. I am a citizen of Albuquerque, and no one questions it. But my parents brought me here as a young kid when I had no say in the matter. I just did what any kid would do. I grew up. Now, what if my parents hadn't come from Texas? What if they'd moved here from Mexico? Would that change all of the experiences I had? Would it make my connection to this place, to this city, any less real or any less significant or any less formative? Would my relationship to this place be any different? I don't think so. So I have to ask, then why should my citizenship status be any different? Citizenship should not be based on where we come from, but where we belong and by what we do there. Being a good citizen means doing what I can to make where I am a better place to be, for me and for all who be here with me. One way I plan to be a good citizen is by establishing relationships with my elected officials. On October 3rd, just a few weeks from now, the next election will be held in Albuquerque for mayor and for 5 of the 9 city council seats. And today, right here at First Unitarian at 3 o'clock, Albuquerque Interfaith is hosting a delegates assembly. And at this meeting, most of the mayoral candidates and many of the candidates for city council will be here to hear what you and I love and what you and I want to change about our city. You're welcome to attend, especially if you live in city council districts 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9. This is a nonpartisan election, and Albuquerque Interfaith is a nonpartisan organization. So I hope you will consider joining us to see what a relational approach to politics can look like. One last thing. A misconception of citizenship is being used to divide our country, to create an us versus them mentality and drawing that dividing line between us and them according to who has a paper saying they have a right to claim this space and who doesn't. True citizenship is not about separating us. True citizenship is about bringing people together. It's about finding the common interests, passions, and concerns of the people, and I mean all of the people who live in a community. Citizenship is not a privilege. It is a right. It is a human right. It is a birthright. Claim it and own it with every breath of your being. Blessed be.